Test one.
So do you want to hear
Councillor Jolly, it's Sean, just a microphone check.
Hello, Sean.
Wonderful.
All right, it just flipped over to 10 o'clock, so I'll call our meeting to order for November 22nd, 2022. It's a special meeting called essentially to talk about Edmonton Metro Transit Services. Attendance at the beginning of the meeting, we have 100% because I see Councillor Jolly online. Thanks for joining us, Councillor Jolly, and everyone else is in chambers. First thing on the agenda, of course, is the adoption thereof. Can I have a member of council? move
Yeah,
that?
I'll do it.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay.
I'll beat Councillor Killick this time around. That the November 22nd, 2022 agenda be adopted as presented.
Thank you. I'll call for the vote. All right. Is closed and that motion passes unanimously. All right, let's get into the meat of it. So the first thing on the agenda is business items, which is really all EMTSC. The first thing is a report from our administration, and we obviously have EMTSC in the room to also do a presentation and to answer a bunch of questions. I'm going to give Paul and his team all the time you need. Normally we have a time limit, but not today. Just we're gonna need to hear from you, obviously. Jay, you're gonna start. Okay, or actually, Paul, why don't you turn your mic and just introduce yourself and who you have with you, so everybody's kind of aware.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Very happy to be here. My name is Paul Jankowski. I am the CEO of your Edmonton Metropolitan Transit Services Commission. With me today, I also have James McDonald, who's our Chief Operating Officer. So James is responsible for all of the development of all the service plans and ultimately of overseeing the operations. And up in the gallery, we've also got Lucas Warren, who's our Manager of Communications. He's going to be the primary driver of all engagements as we move to opening day. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for that. All right, Jay, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good morning, Council. So this is the EMTS update. So we'll give a quick historical from administration before we pass it over to the EMTSC for their presentation. So just to give an introduction to our team right now, with me is Will Steblick, our Manager of Transit Service Delivery, as well as Trevor Dooley, our Manager of Government Relations, and Marta Coppill is in chambers as well, who's our Deputy City Solicitor. Next slide, please. So the background of the EMTSC and how they formed, it took several years of work in the lead up to actual formation of the EMTSC. Its work was undertaken with a long-term desired outcome of improved regional connectivity, savings and efficiencies, and to help build a more attractive business environment conducive to improve talent attraction and retention through a single regional transit brand, as envisioned in the Be Ready or Be Left Behind Blue Ribbon Panel Report in 2016, which is attachment 2 in your agenda package. It started with the City of Edmonton and City of St. Albert completing the Regional Commuter Service Assessment Final Report in 2016, and then completing a regional MOU in 2018 to form a Regional Transit Service Commission by completing the business case. This MOU was scaled to all 13 municipalities in the Edmonton Metro region. Edmonton was then awarded a $3.7 million grant to complete a business case, which all 13 municipalities helped to construct. This was completed in 2020, and then an addendum after Strathcona County and several other municipalities opted not to join the commission. The ministerial order formalizing this commission was completed in 2021. Upon forming of the commission through ministerial order, the EMTSC became the lead in developing the financial and operational business plans for the opening day launch plan. Next slide, please. With the formation, the EMTSC occurred during some challenging times due to COVID-19 pandemic, with 8 municipalities signing on, which included Beaumont, Devon, Edmonton, Fort Saskatchewan, Leduc, St. Albert, Spruce Grove, and Stony Plain. The COVID-19 pandemic also created additional challenges in budget creations as an unstable rider base impacted revenue projections. In September of this year, the City of Edmonton, in part due to completing their local service redesign project, concurrently through the establishment of the EMTSC opted to support the EMTSC being an additional layer of ETS service rather than the redeployment of existing ETS service, which was in contrast to what was initially contemplated in the initial business case. This forms an integral component of the EMTSC opening day service plan, which creates cascading impacts and affects the EMTSC's ability to establish regional efficiencies because it instead creates redundancies. The additional ETS service overlay is still being contemplated by Edmonton City Council as part of their 2023 budget process. The EMTSC has continued to move ahead with a proposed launch date of April 30th, 2022. Their board approved the 2023 operating budget on November 17th this year, with a projected budget increase to St. Albert of approximately $1.4 million needed to cover the shortfall between the proposed 2023 St. Albert Transit budget and the anticipated EMTSC requisition amount, which totals $9.27 million in 2023. The City of St. Albert is legally required to pay the requisition for 2023. Next slide, please. The comparative analysis between 2020 business case and 2023. The original plan had 5,986 total platform hours for the City of St. Albert, as a total regional network, with 850 assigned to St. Albert, which equated to 14% total of the regional network, leading to an $87,000 savings. After the addendum, this increased our portion to 15% and dropped the savings to $72,000. On the opening day service plan, our service hours have increased significantly, have dropped significantly to 2,606. The regional hours have dropped significantly to 2,606, with ours increasing to 994, leading to a 30% allocation for St. Albert with $1.4 million in additional costs. And these additional costs associated with St. Albert above the proposed EY business costs are multi-factored. They include additional service hours created by separating the local and collector services, the cost to support the additional regional routes, primarily to Clairview Station, paratransit services, debt repayment costs that are associated with the start of the EMTSC, and the overhead cost share increase with St. Albert's proportion allocation increasing due to Edmonton's partnership change. Next slide, please. Opening day service plan, route analysis. So as a general overview, the city transit service is expected to operate in large part as a mirror of the current service, except for 2 commuter routes to downtown Edmonton, which will vary a little. There is improved access to Northgate Transit Center and Clairview LRT Station, although there will be less directness to locations at McEwen and Government Center, with travel times impacted, but those are still being determined exactly. Attachment 5 in your agenda package shows the comparisons of routes, and the EMTSC will provide more detail in their presentation of followers. They will need to provide an operations plan that includes route scheduling and assign bus assets to be able to provide an accurate comparative of the services going forward. Once the EMTSC provides an operation plan to form a negotiated service agreement, city administration will be better positioned to articulate impacts to staffing, asset management, and how supporting city departments will be impacted by the change. Under the service agreement model that's proposed, the city of St. Albert will not transition staff nor assets to the commission. Full organizational impacts will be subject to the completion of the service agreements, which are scheduled for 2023 spring. Next slide. Recommendation next steps. This slide comprises the recommendations, including the agenda report for council to debate. One, that the report dated November 22nd, 2022, entitled Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Transit Services Commission Opening Day Service Plan and 2023 Budget Update be received as information. That administration bring the negotiated service agreement between the city of St. Albert and the MTSC to council for information before the end of Q3 of 2023. And as well that 1.452 million be added to the 2023 municipal budget funded by taxes to support the MTSC 2023 member requisition for St. Albert, assuming April 30th, 2023 opening day service by the MTSC. To achieve operations for April 30th, the MTSC needs to enter into service agreements with municipal transit agencies throughout the region, which city administration would bring ours back to council. As identified in the legal section of the agenda report, as a member of the EMTSC, St. Albert is obligated to pay a properly imposed levy in accordance with the EMTSC's bylaws within 30 days of receipt of the invoice. City administration requires council to identify a source for this funding, which administration has recommended as taxes. The addition of the 1.452 million to the 2023 tax requisition will result in approximately a 1.2% tax increase. The current and ongoing financial impacts may also be impacted by the operationalization and completion of relevant service agreements in 2023. Next slide, please. To close, EMTSC administration is on hand to answer questions operational in nature. They will provide a presentation now and council questions can follow. More governance related questions be directed back to Councillor Broadhead as chair of the commission, and St. Albert Transit has the members identified earlier on hand to answer any St. Albert operational questions if needed. Thank you, and I'll pass it to the MTSC.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. Councillor McKay, you've got a question. I'm going to go to the commission first. Okay, all right.
I wasn't sure if we were
I think it'll,
from administration first and then.
so normally we would, but I think maybe some questions will be answered in their presentation, and let's just get it all out and then we'll go to questions. So I think that might be
perfectly
easiest.
fine with that.
All right, Paul, take it away.
Okay, so maybe I'll ask Sean to flip up our presentation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to council today. And thank you very much to the administration for all the work that we've gone through to get here. Certainly Jay provided a very good outline of where we're at. I will expand on that a little bit and add some additional detail, and then we're happy to get into all of the questions that you might have. So moving to the next slide, today, just a very rough outline of our presentation. We will present some of the original EMTSC board objectives. I won't kind of spend a lot of time on that, given that Jay kind of did a good wrap up of all the history. But I will talk about some of the challenges that and expand on some of the challenges that the board has been considering, and a lot of the work that's got us to the point where the board finally approved the operating budget last Thursday. And that's how fresh this information is. I will speak a little bit further about some of the service details, and certainly we have James here that is available to answer questions around that. And then talk about the actual requisition, how we got to the requisition numbers that Jay referenced. We will blow that number up and add some of the detail around that number, and give you some of the considerations that led to the creation of that number and ultimately to the approval of that number. That was a process that took well over a year to get to, but we're now at a point where we've got an opening day service plan and the costs, the true bottom up costs associated with that. And then lastly, I'll touch a little bit on the work that remains to be done. Jay spoke to it a little bit. There will be an awful lot more work between us and your administration and the administrations of the other 7 partners in this commission as we get to opening day. So moving to the next slide, please. This is, Jay's kind of spoken to you about this. This commission is your commission. And while some of the lawyers may quibble with the word that I've put up there about owned by you, the reality is that you and 7 other municipalities in the greater Edmonton region, you partnered. You got together, you created the commission. Yes, it was created by provincial decree, but it was really the result of a partnership agreement that you and your 7 other colleagues really made to one another. You made a commitment, and as such, we are now at a process where we've developed a collective approach that serves all 8 members. While many of the municipalities, and we'll get into this through the discussion about the services, many municipalities look at only the element that connects that municipality with the city of Edmonton. The reality is that the board has now approved a plan. The board has now approved a regional network of which you are one of the 8 owners, and it's the entire network that you're looking at. So all of the new elements that have been added in, all of the changed elements that have been added in to that opening day network, the city of St. Albert is one of the 8 partners in the creation and the future operation of that. It's been a lot of work, as I said, to balance the needs associated with those 8 member municipalities. A number of the original commitments have changed over time, and I'll spend some time speaking about that. Jay alluded to it in his presentation, and I'll expand on that a little bit more. But over the course of the last 8 to 10 months, the board has had that very difficult job of balancing all of the changes in circumstance and balancing all of the needs that each one of the 8 members has brought to the table. So moving on to the next slide then. Many of the original imperatives remain, and many of the original objectives remain. When you got together and made the commitment to your other 7 partners, you made that commitment on the basis of a need to create a more robust and a better integrated regional network in order to drive regional prosperity. And this continues to be the fundamental objective of this and other regional imperatives that are in play, but driving economic growth for the region, recognizing that it's not just a disparate collection of municipalities, but it's a regional approach. Many of our residents do not see municipal boundaries. Many of our residents need to have access to employment opportunities, to education opportunities, and to recreational opportunities in municipalities outside of the one in which they reside. And this system, where we are today, is the first building block, truly costed building block of that ultimate system. We are here as a result of the actions that you and the other 7 partners took to create a globally competitive and vibrant region. I'm going to spend a little more time talking about the economic imperative as it relates to jobs. And certainly in the discussions that we've had with the city of Edmonton, we actually had a number of external stakeholders, not us as staff, but we had external stakeholders that really brought forward the argument that a connected system like this is vital to getting people to those higher paying but perhaps lower skilled jobs that will drive our economic prosperity in the region. There are many employment opportunities that are created across the 8 member municipalities, and I will even say beyond the 8 members, but in some of the neighboring municipalities. And while our work today has focused on the 8 members, we're also very conscious of the fact that your residents may need to get to employment opportunities in some of the non-participating municipalities around the region. So we're creating the first step in serving the 8 members, but also providing opportunities by integrated transit thinking with some of the non-members, because your residents do have to get to those employment opportunities regardless of where they are in the region. And similarly, many of the residents in the city of Edmonton, for example, are seeing the opportunities that increasingly exist beyond Edmonton's boundaries, but are being created in areas such as Atchison, such as the airport area, such as the economic heartland. all of those jobs are being created and are now there to be filled. And many of those people that will be working in those growing employment clusters will come from multiple areas around the region. And last but not least, I don't want to gloss over this. The original partners made this commitment to ensure that we're building an environmentally sustainable region. There's, I won't belabor the fact that transit is a solution that helps green the region. Transit is a solution that will lead to lower greenhouse gas emissions across this region. And the alternative to a better integrated transit system is more people buying individual modes of transportation, more people buying cars, and as a result, impacting the environment in that way. So over the course of the next slide, please, over the course of the last year, your board, your representative on the board, the chair of our board, Councillor Broadhead, along with his colleagues on the board, have been really focused on what that first step looks like. What is the service plan that will link the 8 member municipalities? How will we integrate local services in those municipalities where that commitment was made to bring them under EMTSC oversight on day one? And figure out how that can be done in a way that reflects some of the changed circumstances that have come up over the course of the last 24 months. That is a reality. Jay spoke to it a little bit earlier, and it's no surprise to many of you that when we came forward with the original proposal to this elected council, this term's elected council in the city of Edmonton, when we came forward in March of this year, that particular council took a very different point of view than the preceding one. And that council identified that many things have changed in the intervening year to 2 years since that business case was created. Jay alluded to the fact that in Edmonton, they went through a major bus network redesign. And so many of the original assumptions that were included in the business case had been modified over time. That council also made it clear to us when we appeared in front of them early this year that the original commitment of contributing a number of the existing services and adapting a number of the existing services, this council was not prepared for that to be part of the solution. And so as a result, your board, through the direction of the board, you instructed us, and your board instructed us to come up with an alternate. What can be done, recognizing that those objectives that I spoke to on the previous slide remain imperative. What can a new solution look like? And over the course of the last 8 to 10 months, that is what we've been focused on. We've effectively taken some of the changed blocks. Some of the blocks remain the same, but some of the building blocks have changed. And we've crafted a creative solution that can help us achieve those objectives that were originally set out. But it is in quite a different way than what was originally envisioned in the business case. It has a different financial picture associated with it than was in the business case. And I'm not going to shy away from that. That is the fiscal reality that your board, the EMTSC board, has had to deal with. In order to deal with that fiscal reality, we took a different approach to what was envisioned in the business case. We actually developed bottom-up costing. And this was something that your board insisted on very early in the process to come up with truly real costs. What is it going to cost to develop that service and put that service into place? And for that, I have to extend my thanks yet again to the administrations of the 8 municipalities, because the costs that we have used are the costs that all of the municipalities have been incurring. So we didn't develop new hourly costs for service. We took much of the information that Bill and Jay and others provided, and others across the 8 member municipalities, and we use that to work with all of those technical experts across those municipalities to develop a truly bottom-up costed formula for the services that we're providing. So we're using your numbers and coming up with the costs that are now have now been approved for discussion and for requisition from the member municipalities. We've also met with your subject matter experts and those others around the communities to discuss service levels. And there are two very different discussions that took place. One which was centered around regional service, and the second which was centered around local service. And I'll get into that in a little more detail as we go through the split of those in the with reference to St. Albert. But an overarching objective when we were talking about those services was not to significantly change the services or not to significantly diminish the levels of service that are being delivered today. So a starting point was the existing levels of service that are in our member municipalities. We didn't want to create a situation where there would be broad scale changes on day one, on opening day. We wanted to ensure that there's continuity, that those travelers that have grown to expect the service that is in place can continue to rely on those services. So the changes that you're seeing to these services that existed before are fairly minimal, both at the regional level and at the local level. But there are some significant additions that have been added, largely as a result of the position that Edmonton took. And therefore, again, I will say that the building blocks are a little bit different, but we've still arranged them in a way that where the ultimate picture, the ultimate solution meets those objectives that were postulated 3 and 4 years ago and that remain valid for today. So moving on then, what does that picture look like? That picture that the board of the EMTSC approved last Thursday includes an overall expenditure, an anticipated expenditure of $29 million. That also reflects an anticipated collection of fare and non-fare revenues, again, based on much of the information that we received from your technical experts, from the subject matter experts in the existing municipalities. And what it funds, what it delivers for that cost are 13 regional routes, including 3 new routes, largely new routes within the city of Edmonton, and 1 potential new route connecting the international airport to downtown Edmonton directly. But again, I want to stress that while it's very tempting to look at only the services that show a direct connection between St. Albert and Edmonton per se, because that's what we've all gotten used to, this is an overall network. This is an approach where we're taking all those building blocks, combining them into one. And as such, you as a member of the eight partners, you as one of the 8 partners are now responsible or will now be part owner of that system, which includes those new components. Your residents, the people that want to get to employment opportunities elsewhere, or your businesses that rely on employees coming from beyond St. Albert's boundaries, those are the people that we focused on. Those are the people that the board is focused on delivering or coming up with a service approach, a network service approach that meets those needs, both now and in the future. It also includes local transit in 5 of the member municipalities, St. Albert being one. There are 5 municipalities, 5 of the members, Edmonton excluded, 5 of the members, where the oversight of that direct service will now be part of the EMTSC collection of services. And there's one, St. Albert, where the discussion has also included the oversight of the paratransit service. So early on in the discussions, through discussions with your administration, it was identified that many of the resources that are in place to oversee local service are also the same resources that you rely on to oversee paratransit services in your community. So it made sense from our discussions with the administration to perhaps look at shifting the oversight, but that really is a decision that is up to you as the council in St. Albert. It makes financial sense. It makes administrative sense based on the discussions that we've had. And what we did is we included in the budget that the board approved that suggestion that the provision be made to essentially oversee the delivery of paratransit services. So that's the totality of the services that are being funded by the approved budget. And next slide, please. These really do reflect, as I said, and I won't belabor this point, these really reflect a lot of the changes that have occurred across the 8-member municipalities. It has resulted in us now considering, as Jay identified, a very different operating environment. And I'm going to just spend a minute on that one. As Jay identified, or started to allude to in his presentation, the original premise through the business case was that before day one, before opening day, many of the assets or all of the transit assets and all of the transit labor force would transition into the EMTSC. That is something that remains an objective. But given the situation that we now find ourselves in, and there's one specific factor that plays into that factor has given us a reason to pause on that. And that factor is quite simply a recent motion that the city of Edmonton passed that has introduced some uncertainty with regards to Edmonton's ultimate contribution to this. And that motion referenced the direction to their administration to carry out some form of an administrative review of the EMTSC in late 2023 or early 2024, after the initial operations have started. And given that, I think there is a very good reason for all of the councils to consider perhaps delaying what was the original intent to transition both assets and people into the EMTSC. And as such, the discussions that we've recently entered into with the administrations of those municipalities that are operating transit has been around an operating model that would have us use the assets and use the people, but perhaps not move forward with an outright transfer at this point in time. I believe that protects individual municipalities with regards to the investments that they've made. It protects the people, gives them a little bit of certainty about what is now an uncertainty that's been introduced into the mix. And as such, that's the service model that we would propose to engage in further negotiation with your administration. I did note the date that was identified in your staff presentation, and I'll perhaps say that I think we may need to accelerate that date a little bit. There is an awful lot of work to be done, but essentially I think we need to have at least the principles, if not the actual agreements, approved by the time opening day comes around. So that gets us to opening day. The opening day that the board has now decided on and has approved, and which forms the basis of our budget that has been approved, is April 30th or May 1st. April 30th falls on a Sunday, so we're kind of using those two dates interchangeably because most of the service is actually delivered during weekdays. And we're looking at that as the start of operations under EMTSC oversight. Moving on, this slide, you've already seen it in Jay's presentation. This is the collective of the intermunicipal or the regional routes. This is the network that the board has approved. This is the network that has the 8 members now being responsible for the overall delivery of these services, with all of these services having defined interconnectivity points with each other, as well as with some of the underlying local service. There are interconnectivity points within St. Albert with local service. There are interconnectivity points within Edmonton with much of the underlying ETS service. But this is the network that we believe meets opening day needs. And as you can see, and as Jay has already spoken to with regards to St. Albert, many of those services that you have grown accustomed to, that your travelers have grown to rely on, continue to be fundamental elements of this service. There are the 3 main lines coming down from St. Albert, but they're connecting into a network that includes some very new components, particularly within the city of Edmonton boundaries. And I'll go through a couple of the key slides because you've got all of the routes, I believe, in your package, but I'll touch on the ones that I believe might be of most interest right now. Flipping to the next slide, the first Metro Northwest route is the one that connects the St. Albert Exchange through Naki down into the downtown core. Again, while this is a combination of what are now numbered as two separate services, the collective single service provides much, if not more service in this corridor. So roughly the same service in this corridor in totality. The next one, Metro Northwest 2, goes down into the downtown core, but also serves McEwen and a few other downtown destinations. The next one beyond that is the one that goes down to the U of A. And again, it's similar to the one that's operating today through Westmount, but at U of A, it also interconnects with a number of other regional services, most notably the Metro West run, which is depicted on, and we'll bounce around a little bit here, and I apologize to Sean, but it interconnects, if we can jump to slide 15, I believe it is. That one there at the university, it connects with Metro West, which allows residents to access multiple points in the West End all the way out to Lewis Farms. Jumping back, I think you'll also be interested in the one on slide 12, that being the Metro Cross. So that line, that network element actually provides new service along what is one of the future Edmonton bus rapid transit corridors on 137th Avenue, and would allow for your travelers from or connecting to St. Albert to make connections, direct connections to Clareview and to Northgate. At Northgate, there's also an interface, moving on to the next slide, to slide 13, with Metro North, which is again a new service in a future bus rapid transit corridor down the 101st Street and 97th Street corridors, but it would allow connections to the Eau Claire terminal along with other interstitial stops along that express, if I can call it that, express run from the north down into the downtown core. So there are a number of points of connectivity with other regional network elements. Along all of these routes, there will also be additional stops that will provide for opportunities to interchange or transfer from the regional services to some of the underlying local services, both within St. Albert and within the city of Edmonton. And these are the skeleton elements. These are the main bones of the regional service that I think you might be most interested in. The other one that I will just touch on, and thank you, we're jumping to maybe we haven't jumped to it, but I believe it's the second last slide in this. It's the Metro YEG slide, 21. Perhaps yes, that one. There is one new element that has been accelerated by the board, and so in the very first work that we carried out, we had identified a medium to longer term opportunity, and we had indicated that there's perhaps opportunities for different funding sources for what would be a direct connection between the airport and the downtown business core, and at the downtown business area create further interconnectivity points with some of the other regional network elements. This would be a direct service, so a higher speed service than what exists today between the airport and various points in the city of Edmonton and beyond. This would be a direct service that would allow people then to get directly to downtown, either remain in the downtown business district or interconnect with some of the other, like Metro Northwest 1 or Metro Northwest 2 to get people up to St. Albert. This would be a route that would benefit all of the municipalities in our esteem, except perhaps with regards to Beaumont, given its location at the southeast portion, which we have another solution for, and I won't get into that one. But the board, while it considered this opportunity, the city of Edmonton has now actually asked us to asked its own staff to look at potentially accelerating this, and as a result, we've presented it, and the board has included it as a potential element in the opening day plan. So those are all of the regional routes, and I will come back to this and happy to answer any questions that you may have on those. But perhaps now we can slide to slide 22, I think it is. Yeah, so this is the totality of all of the regional elements that we are now preparing to deliver starting on April 30th or May 1st. We believe this is the right solution for today. Again, it takes many of the changed building blocks, but creates that new solution that balances traveler expectations with the fiscal reality that we are facing. Next slide, please. And speaking about fiscal reality, this is it. This is the totality of the costs for all 8 members that reflect that $29 million cost figure that I spoke about early on in the presentation. And we've taken, for purposes of this presentation, and highlighted in the teal color the costs or the numbers for the city of St. Albert, excuse me. That wasn't intentional. I didn't mean to get choked up over that. So you can see how we derive now from the bottom up, the total $9.3 million cost that has been identified and approved by the board for the city of St. Albert for 2023. The first 2 elements that are shown there are the regional direct costs and the local direct costs. And I've spoken to how we've developed both of those costs, but those numbers that you see, the 4.3 and the 4.4, effectively reflect 8 months of service. So there would be an annualized cost to those in future years. But for 2023, those are the costs for providing the service from April 30th to the end of the year. We've also included the paratransit costs of $809,000. Again, those as the local, just as with the local direct costs, those are the service costs that we've gotten from your administration, and we've included those in our budget. Beyond that, those are the newly calculated costs for some of the shared services. So we've got the operations indirect service costs of $754,000. Those are the costs that reflect some of the transit support. So some of the staff, the processes, the tools for transit support. And that number is actually should be significantly lower than what your annual number is today. Because one of the great things that we've done is we've taken a lot of the support that is currently being provided here within the city of St. Albert, and we followed through on that original promise of achieving greater efficiencies across the 8-member municipalities. And we're looking to actually share resources, not just St. Albert resources, but resources from some of the other municipalities to accomplish many of the common functions or common needs that exist across all of the members. We've also got the estimated revenue, which we've worked with your administration to come up with. And we've developed estimates for the commission pooled costs, and the last one being the debt servicing repayment costs. So I'll touch on that a little bit. It was always recognized early in the business case discussions, and it was documented in the business case, that the stand-up of this commission would cost money. And particularly in light of the fact that the stand-up would be occurring concurrently with continued operation by the existing municipal members, this money would be over and above what the money to stand it up would be over and above what's needed to continue delivering services. So in the original plan and through the original approvals granted by the Minister of Municipal Affairs, there was the approval to use debt financing for the stand-up of the commission. That debt financing was estimated to be somewhere in the order of $5 to $7 million. And originally in the governing documents that were developed and approved by the board for the operations of the commission, that debt was to be repaid over the first 4 years of operation. Through the considerations over the course of the budget deliberations, the board has now asked us to take a second look at that. And ultimately, on Thursday of last week, the board approved a different repayment schedule, which has in fact reduced the repayment costs and spread them out over, moved them from being spread out over the first 4 years to the first 7 years of operation. That has resulted in an overall repayment annually of about $1 million. And the repayment costs, the debt costs were always apportioned in the original governing documents. The 315,000 represents the city of St. Albert's apportioned percentage of that $1 million repayment cost for 2023. So all told, that bottom line number of $9.3 million represents the full year of indirect costs or pooled commission costs. It represents 8 months of service, and it represents a full year's repayment, St. Albert's portion of a full year's repayment on a 7-year repayment schedule. Moving on to the next slide. This is just a blow up of the 2023 requisition. So and I'm not sure why because the revenue is included in there. The $9.3 million number is the total requisition number. On Thursday of last week, what the board approved was essentially a 2-phase requisition process for 2023. The 2 phases would be, or the 2 stages would be, a first requisition going out on January 1st. That would be a smaller number, and then the remainder of the requisition would go out on March 1st. And I apologize, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me right now, but I'm sure that we can dig those up and have them to you. I'm sure I'll get them momentarily in text form. So that is the financial picture that the board has approved. That is the budget that the board has approved with the cost to the city of St. Albert. Next slide, please. In terms of what's next, and both Jay and I have spoken about this a little bit, we're now at the point where, given the budget approval, we've got to prepare for operations for May 1st. We've got to do all of the detailed service transition negotiation, in particular, figuring out how we're going to document the agreement that we're going to enter into with each municipality to allocate the use of the resources that exist to the operation of a regional network moving from April 30th on. All of that work will also be carried out in concert or concurrent with developing the details around the opening day of service and communicating those, engaging with your community, engaging with the travelers that are either departing from St. Albert or coming into St. Albert, to make sure that, again, we don't disrupt, we don't impact them significantly on opening day, that they fully understand what it is that what opportunities will be available to them on opening day, how the service may be expanded, what additional opportunities may exist, what the move to EMTSC means for them, ensuring that everybody has all of that information and is properly informed of all those things to minimize any kind of inconvenience, minimize any kind of confusion, minimize, quite frankly, calls to you and to our offices on April 30th or May 1st. So a lot of work to be undertaken, a lot of outstanding need to be addressed, but those are the things that are going to keep us all awake over the course of the next 6 months. I think that's the end of my presentation. Next slide. I think that's pretty much a wrap. Just to summarize it all, your community's voice in regional transit planning is the commission, and through the oversight of the board of directors, through the oversight provided by Councillor Broadhead and his colleagues on the commission, we are meeting the needs of all, balancing and meeting the needs of all of the communities that we will be serving. We will be providing access to that linked transit solution through April 30th and beyond. And we will be developing and delivering that comprehensive regional network. You, as one of the founding partners, and I got to give the city of St. Albert credit here. It was you and Edmonton that were the drivers in creating this commission a number of years ago. And with that work, we're now at a point where we've reached a milestone. We will be delivering that integrated network, that responsive local service on April 30th, May 1st of next year. I believe that that's the last slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jankowski. Has the brand been made public?
So the brand has not yet been announced.
Okay.
That is an issue that I believe that given all the changes that have taken place, that our board will be considering again in December of this year,
Okay.
what the rollout of that brand will look like. And I'll perhaps leave that question or ask that question be deferred until we have that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's why I wanted to make sure we didn't ask that if we weren't ready, if you weren't ready. Can I ask one quick question and I'll go to council? Because obviously there's members of the region that are not part of the commission. Yet you highlighted one bus route that's going into Leduc County. So I'm just wondering how those non-member municipalities are financially contributing to routes that are coming into their municipality.
So thank you for that. So yes, there are a couple of existing services that are being relied upon by residents of our member municipalities, as well as residents of some non-member municipalities. And the board has actually considered how to deal with those. And the opening day service plan proposes to maintain those services with the existing financial arrangements that exist between the non-members and the members. We continue to have discussions, and in particular, they were there with Leduc County and with Parkland County. We believe we've got the agreement of both of those counties to continue with those existing arrangements for the existing services. And I highlight that because it's for the existing services only. Those are the things that have been worked into the budget, and we wanted to make sure that we don't inconvenience either the residents that are using some of those services between a member and a non-member municipality, or some of those travelers that are coming into employment opportunities within the member municipalities using those services. So the board has wisely, I believe, included the appropriate provisions to continue to rely on those existing agreements, while also building a framework for considering how future requests for service outside of the member municipalities would be dealt with in the future.
So reading, I think between the lines there, so the existing service to the EIA right now does not go to downtown.
So there are actually two services that are impacted in Leduc. There is one service that, if you're talking about the Leduc services.
Yeah.
So there's one service that goes from downtown Leduc, the city of Leduc, through the county, services multiple points within the county, and then comes up into Century Park.
Okay.
That service has a cost contribution from the county of Leduc to it. That will continue to stay in place. There is also local service that is shared between the city of Leduc and the county of Leduc. Currently, it makes stops at the airport. That local service that will also remain in place with the same cost contribution from the county of Leduc. And similarly, in Parkland County, there are services that are coordinated by Spruce Grove to addresses and to locations in Parkland County. Those are being those will exist as of January 1st, and the commission will essentially take over the oversight of those with the underlying financial commitments that exist.
Okay, so Parkland and Leduc County will continue to transfer finances over to
The commission.
commission. Okay, but the downtown to EIA, no contribution from Leduc County.
So at this point, that is the one the express route that we're
Yeah.
talking about. The details around that have not been finalized. The city of Edmonton Council asked the administration at Edmonton to bring back 100% Edmonton funded option for that, and that is what we've included in the budget that the board approved last Thursday.
Interesting. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna go to my council, Council McKay.
Thank you very much for the presentations, both from administration and Mr. Jankowski. I appreciate the additional information, but I gotta open with I am very concerned. This scares me. So I appreciate the additional information and the opportunity to ask questions. So maybe that can allay some of my concerns. But where to start? I've got a few questions. So if I jump around, please I apologize. So I guess maybe this one would go to the commission first, and I just need more help in understanding how we got to this situation. Particularly with, like you identified, Edmonton as a major partner in St. Albert. I mean, we've been looking at this since probably about 2014, 2016 and ongoing. And certainly I understand that administrations change and councils change as well. So, I mean, even without COVID, I mean, and that certainly did have an impact on this thing. So help me understand a little bit in relation to the Edmonton situation. So how was Edmonton Council when you were making this presentation to them? It looks like they really changed what the original Ernst & Young proposal was and what the initial stand-up of the commission was. I mean, it looks like they were given an opportunity to really modify it, because I'm looking at some of the funding requisitions. I'm looking at some of the comparative analysis in relation to the services. So can you kind of describe the process a little bit in relation to as well how you see it anyways? And I realize you're on the commission, you're on the outside, but from your vantage point, how was Edmonton able to really modify their agreement or kind of the parameters of it that's leaving us today with substantially a different project in front of us?
Well, I think it's an absolutely fair question. The reality is that when we presented, and you'll probably recall that early this year, we did a round of update presentations to all of the municipalities. I appeared before you and I appeared before the city of Edmonton as well. And the city of Edmonton Council at that time indicated a significant concern with regards to the commitments that were identified in the original business case, and indicated that they would not follow through, or that this council was not inclined to follow through on the notion of modifying existing services in order to build a regional network. And so as a result of that, the discussions then with the board's direction, we looked at, well, how else can we capture, how else can we create a solution that achieves many of the stated objectives? And that's where we ended up speaking about a solution that had new elements, new service elements. What the city council in Edmonton clearly indicated was that they weren't prepared to change the existing services. And we presented a solution which added service. So there are a number of routes that are brand new now with Edmonton. They are effectively placed on top of the existing services. But it is fair to point out, and I don't believe that the administration or council would quibble with this at Edmonton, the overall size of that contribution from the city of Edmonton is substantially different, i.e. substantially smaller than what was identified in the original business case. So I spoke to the fact that we're now dealing with changes in the building blocks, and we've used these changed building blocks to come up with a new solution that we believe, and the board believes, reflect the changes in circumstances, but still achieve most of the original benefits that were touted, that were anticipated from the original business case. It is absolutely fair to identify that given the change in the city of Edmonton, we've had to modify the financial picture for all members. And Edmonton's picture has changed. They're no longer taking existing service and contributing it to, they're keeping 100% of the cost of the existing service, and they're being asked to actually add service and the cost of service over and above that. That is what's at play in their budget deliberation. Here, we're talking about an impact resulting from that here and at some of the other municipalities. I think the other thing that's come into play is that with COVID, a lot of the existing services were rationalized as well. So that the change, the base that we started with was different than what was in the original business case.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much for the candor anyways, in relation to that. I think this is one of the unknowns that we have here, because I mean, as they roll out their different service reviews and potentially even this administrative review that comes at the end of, I guess, Q4 2023, we're still all on this is my angst. We're still kind of sitting on the edge, because at any point in time, they may decide that's not working, and rather than move to the commission, they may continue to add and enhance their own services to meet that need. So I mean, I guess that's one of the, I mean, how do we even work through that? How do you see that coming forward? And maybe that's an unfair question. Maybe I'll withdraw it, because I mean, that's an unfair question to you as a commission, because you don't know the unknowns either. So
I'll tackle it a little bit. And while there would have to be many decisions that are considered by the board, I think the one thing that I will stress is what both I and Jay alluded to in the presentations, is that what we all want to achieve is a solution today that doesn't inconvenience travelers today, nor inconvenience travelers at that point in the future should things change. And that's why we're looking at a very different operating environment, one which would maintain the assets in the ownership of the member municipalities, one which would maintain the labor resources with the employment conditions with the member municipalities, so that should things change in the future, some of those decisions that the board and others would have to consider would be made easier, recognizing that objective of maintaining continuity in traveler experience and traveler services is the overriding objective. So I can't answer your question with regards to what those decisions might look like, but I do believe we have an ability today to create a set of circumstances, or create the conditions that would make those ultimate decisions easier to consider.
yeah, no, I appreciate the risk that you're building into the plan, and you just have to. So I guess, I mean, can I move on to so 38% of the total regional network is now St. Albert. Is that just a direct impact of Edmonton's decision to layer service instead of the other way?
Yeah, so I think it's mostly related to that. I think the reality is that there are, because of the reduction in Edmonton's contribution, because of some of the service changes that we've included in the opening day service, the overall percentage for the city of St. Albert will be approximately 45% once we get to a full annualized service in 2024, and Edmonton's proportion is estimated to be at about 35%, if that plan is the one that continues to be the base.
Yeah, I mean, a comment with the next question is I mean, they're the huge player in the field, and yet they're not pulling the same amount of weight in a region. So I mean, I guess 38% ties to the regional direct costs of 4,357,055. Is that why we're being asked to for that much is identified in the financials?
So the 45% that I just alluded to is actually the taking all of the service hours for both local and regional service and the approximate allocations, and then coming up with a proportionate division of those across all 8 members.
All right, and so maybe Jay, so the requisition 2023 was the 9,279,798. What's our current costs right now? Are we at around 11 million or is it?
Through the chair, Councillor Mackay, yes, we're over 11 million. So our net cost is about 11.7. Operating costs are in the high 14s. So with our revenue projections, we're down in the about 11.7.
What is our handy buses? What does that cost us about to operate?
It's roughly in the $900,000 range.
So about $900,000 right now. How many stops do we have currently on our handy buses?
As far as dedicated stops, I can ask Will Step to provide that answer.
Within St. Albert, it's unlimited. It's door to door within St. Albert.
Yeah, but what about going into Edmonton and the region? We only go into, we have some stops in Edmonton, don't we?
That's correct. We have about 15 stops in Edmonton now.
Do you know whether that will be improved with handy bus service in Edmonton?
So what we're working with right now is simply assuming the oversight of the existing service. We're not envisioning changing that. One of the principles that we've alluded to for both local service and in this case for paratransit, given that 100% of those costs are going to be borne by the parent municipality, the discussions around level of service will really be driven by the administrations and by you as the council.
Okay, so help me understand then, why would we turn that service over to the commission versus operating it now if we're doing all the heavy lifting anyway?
So the opportunity exists for you to continue operating it, but the staff resources that are responsible for overseeing that service are essentially the same staff resources that would be helping deliver or would be coming over, would be allocated to delivery of local service and regional service within the city of St. Albert and for the interconnection. So in the discussions that we've had with the senior administration, it was identified that it might be difficult to split those and it might make more sense just to accelerate, because it was always envisioned that paratransit would be a future move. But it might be in this particular case, and St. Albert is the only one where this has been identified as an opportunity and perhaps a wise move today.
And maybe if I could just jump in, Councillor, and Jay can back me up. I think that is exactly paratransit local services do not result in any increased operational costs because it's the exact mechanism that we're using now superimposed. The FTE allotment, to be a bit parochial, is not neat and tied. Everybody does everything as it relates to transit. So we don't have, a paratransit and a local transit, this obviously, and a regional transit. And so in terms of their focus, unity of effort to be able to deliver the service, trying to split out colors of money and keep things separate would create more work than it solves.
What's our cost recovery right now, Jay?
I'll pass that to Will. I believe it was at 40. It's dropped.
Our cost recovery right now is approximately 30%.
And then, and what was it pre-pandemic?
Pre-pandemic was approximately 35%.
So I mean, transit is a public good. Paratransit is a public good. When you blow out the commission, have you guys looked at any actual projections as to what your return would be?
So the one thing at this point is we do not have any forecasting or modeling built-in experience. We've been wholly reliant on the services that are currently being used in both Edmonton and St. Albert largely. So we're reliant on the projections from the two major players. I will say that the projections from some of the smaller systems are even rougher, if I can put it that way. But certainly over the course of time, we will be building that kind of expertise. And one of the big factors that we believe that will help us come up with much better estimates in the future of both ridership and revenues associated with those riderships is the investment that you and the other transit players have made in the ARC card system. That will provide much of the data to actually refine our financial analytics and come up with the better costs in the future.
And I'm almost done, Mayor. I don't want
No,
to.
go ahead. We can come back to you too.
Yeah, no, I realize that, and I'm certain that maybe other questions will generate more in my mind. So when are you making similar presentations in front of budget to all of the member municipalities like i.e. Spruce Grove, Leduc?
So we haven't been asked to appear in front of all. We have appeared yesterday at Fort Saskatchewan. Fort Saskatchewan and St. Albert were the two where direct requests were received, and certainly happy to make similar status updates, provide similar status updates to others, but that request has not been extended. I should modify that a little bit. Certainly with regards to the city of Edmonton, we've had much more detailed presentations to the city of Edmonton, largely reflective of the fact that, as I mentioned before, the service plan for Edmonton is substantially different than either what's being delivered today or what was envisioned originally.
Yeah, and just following up on that quickly so when is Edmonton's decision, or do we know that yet?
So they've informed us that they expect to be through the entire budget process by the middle of December.
And their add-on is, I mean, like they're layering. So you, like you said initially to my response to my first question is so they're layering on. So they're actually just going to go and actually add additional funds to their transit budget that are going to be allocated to the commission.
So I'm not sure if it's going to be within their transit budget or if it's going to be a, commission cost, an external body cost. But certainly the way it's being positioned right now by the administration is the overall, in the case of Edmonton, it's about $13 million. It is being positioned as an unfunded service request to their council. It is, we've had lots of discussions with their administration. It is one of the many requests that their council is going to be considering. But certainly in terms of the discussions that we've had at the board level, where one of their council members, Councillor Knack, is our board member, he's indicated that he remains hopeful that they will be this request will be considered appropriately.
I don't want to get into forecasting myself, but if this doesn't get past Edmonton, what does that pretty much start the process towards decommissioning the commission, or is that the right word, decertifying the commission?
So that's certainly something that we haven't had a discussion with the board about. We continue to be hopeful that with the change that the board has approved with this reconfiguration of those building blocks that I talked about, that we've created a solution that is palatable from a financial standpoint to the city of Edmonton, that they see the benefit of the new services that are being provided and how that might relate to the remainder of their transit service. So we've worked hard to get to a solution that is actually balancing all of those needs. So I'll be frank, I don't think the board's considered that or considered alternatives.
No, fair. And it's not really a question. It was more of a comment, and I appreciate your candidate. I mean, you're a part of an independent commission, and those are kind of opportunities. I just want to finish up just with the net municipal funding, the actual requests. I mean, so we're at 9,279, 798, which is what I mentioned previously, but Edmonton is with this proposal, that requisition is 10,305, 656. I mean, is that just their level of service? Is that like, I just don't understand the requisition. So I mean, so we're providing 38%. What's actually Edmonton's providing right now then?
So I'll take you to the second to last or the third to last line there. Yeah, so the base fee, and this is something that the board considered. This was the subject of a lot of discussion at the board, and under the governing document, under the governance bylaw, and even in the original business case, it was posited that for those costs that aren't recovered from the fare box, those costs that aren't direct service costs as identified in the first 2 or 3 rows, there was a cost allocation methodology prescribed, and that cost methodology included the reliance on 2 tools. One was a flat fee that would be applied to each one of the 8 member municipalities. And the second was a per capita cost. And again, the per capita cost would be the same for every single one of the members. But by virtue of Edmonton having by far the largest population and the decisions that the board made to include a $15,000 fixed fee and a per capita cost, in this case, it's worked out to be about $3.72 per capita. When we apply that cost recovery tool for the debt, for the commission pooled costs, that's what results in that large $3.7 million number, which in turn contributes to that $10.3 million bottom line.
Great, thank you. That was and that's clarified that something. And just follow up on that with the debt servicing, there's Edmonton and is picking up their proportion of the debt servicing for the first year.
So the debt servicing is actually the weighted cost allocations for those were specified in the original government bylaw, and there were specific percentages that were identified in that 2021 and 2022 document. And that overall amount reflects about a 59% contribution to debt repayment. I believe it's 59% from the city of Edmonton. Sorry, 56%. I've been corrected.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your response, and thank you again very much for the presentation. I realize the position you're in right now, a lot of unknowns, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Councillor Hughes, you're up next.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a few, but I'm not going to ask everything at once, just because I want to share the floor a little bit. So the cost revenue, I'm going to go to the hi Jay. So the cost recovery right now is 30% with St. Albert, you're saying, right? But we're only estimating revenue at 1.6 million for 2023. So can you just kind of help me figure out why the two numbers are different?
Jake?
Through the chair to Councillor Hughes. The actual difference is our projections are actually over that. We're in 3.2, I believe, for 2023. The difference of what they're showing is their 2/3 portion of that is why their revenue projections are a bit lower than what ours are. So the revenue will have a third of the year of the revenue coming in, and then the balance is listed with them.
I get that, but and I figured it was 2/3, but then that would be like 2.4 million, but we should be making over 3 million, right? So just if we're doing a 30% cost recovery on $11 million. So I'm just trying to make sure that, like, I guess the follow-up question that is, let's say we exceed our revenue projection. Does all the money go over to the Transit Commission? So our numbers are actually even higher than what we're providing over there?
I'd actually have to pass that back to the EMTs to speak to that.
So the way that the revenues were calculated or estimated was we've used a number of different parameters there. There are revenue calculations for each particular regional route or the regional services. And those on those regional routes that are sort of St. Albert based, if I can call it that. The information that St. Albert has collected over the years was used as the basis for the calculation of those revenues. So whatever revenue numbers we got from St. Albert for, in particular, the Metro Northwest 1, 2, and 3, we used in that calculation. The revenues on some of the other routes are also going to be allocated to the people that are paying for those routes, or those municipalities that are contributing costs for those routes. And the percentages of contributions of revenues to offset costs is going to be the same. So if this one municipality is paying 10% of a particular route, 10% of the revenues generated on that route in year one will be allocated to offset the costs of that particular route. So there's a very detailed cost allocation by route and revenue allocation by route. There's a whole table, and I don't have it here in front of me, of those cost allocations for each one of the 13 regional routes. And we've used estimates in the case of, let's say, the Metro Cross route. We've used estimates from Edmonton, which given that St. Albert and Edmonton are going to be the major contributors to that route, funding contributors, again, the revenues would be shared on that particular route in that using those same percentages. Over time, and I go back to the earlier response, over time, as we get data from the ARC card implementation as to whose residents or where the people are getting on and getting off, we will be adjusting both the cost allocations by route and revenue allocations by route. So it's not as simplistic an answer that I can give you that it's 30%. It's a whole combination of percentages, route by route by route. As far as the local service is concerned, in the city of St. Albert, 100% of the revenues generated on the local service will be offsetting the local costs for the local service here in St. Albert.
So if the revenues exceed the projected amounts, does St. Albert keep it or does it go to the commission?
It's used to offset St. Albert's cost. So the revenues go directly to offset the costs of those particular routes.
Okay, I understand that. The call for money right now is 9.279 million. Let's say that the revenue for St. Albert is 2 million and not 1.6.
Yes,
The difference of the $350,000 would go to the commission.
it would go to offset St. Albert's costs in the future.
So would our net still be 9.2?
For 2023, we're using these budgeted amounts. In the future, we'll be adjusting the costs and the revenues using the data that is available and making the future adjustments. So for example, in the 2024 budget, we'll be using the revised cost. If there's more revenue being generated on the St. Albert local routes, the cost for delivering those routes will be offset by that amount of revenue. So the revenue will stay to offset the municipality's costs.
Okay, so the 350,000 would go to the commission and then it would be used as a credit for 2024 to decrease the one-time costs for the 2024?
No, so the in-year budget will be managed as in-year expense. We haven't identified reserve accounts or anything like that to this point in time. We will be doing that. There will be a whole methodology that will be developed to deal with budget surpluses, just as you have in a municipal environment. There are rules around creating debt retirement reserves. There are all kinds of financial instruments that we have yet to put in place. What I'm saying is that the information collected in 2023 will be used to adjust the requisition asks by the board, I would expect, for 2024, in considering all of the other financial needs that the board will have to deal with. The commission is going to have all kinds of future financial requirements, and there'll be a lot of financial discussions that the board will, and financial decisions that the board will have to make.
Okay, I don't think I got an answer, but I'm just going to move on right now. So the YEG, like the MetroCross Red route that goes to Clairview, the decision to move this on, was this demand from residents to say that they wanted to have a St. Albert bus go all the way down there? Or what instigated this additional route?
I'm sorry, which route are we speaking about?
MetroCross Red.
The Metro Cross was identified by the commission as an opportunity. It was determined, there were discussions with all of the member municipalities. That was determined to be one of the three routes that made sense to initiate in 2023 as part of the stand-up of the first year of operations.
So is it based on any type of data that indicates that there's a demand for this route to go this way?
Yeah, so in the original business case, there were a number of routes that were identified as contributing to the creation of a regional a regional bus network. There were many more than the three that are being proposed today as part of the opening day service plan, or that have been approved by the board as part of the opening day service plan. There are multiple points of multiple destinations that are being served by those routes. In fact, all three of the routes that have been added on were identified through the City of Edmonton plan as being future bus rapid transit routes. And these three key new elements of the regional network that have been approved by the board are on three of the corridors that were identified for future bus rapid transit. Because these routes provide interconnectivity for all regional travelers, they have been included as part of the regional network. As far as actual projections for day one, we do not have ridership projections. As I said earlier, we have not built the forecasting or modeling capacity. We've been wholly reliant on taking some of the existing resources while minimizing the stand-up costs, because they're all debt financed by you and the other municipalities. We will be building that expertise and we will be building that modeling in the future.
Okay, so when I look at the total costs, it's $29 million that we're coming forward with a 4% 4 million revenue. So that decrease our overall cost recovery from 30% right now, normally 35, to 13.8. So what is the plan to get us at minimum back to a 30% cost recovery?
So the one thing I will say is that building a regional bus network is very different than building a bus service in highly urbanized areas. We are building an overall network that connects locations over a widespread geographic area. The standard cost recovery objectives for highly urbanized transit do not apply in this kind of a situation. I've had a lot of experience in the past building a similar type and operating a similar type of system that spans a very large geographic area with intensified or dense nodes. Because we're operating transit for long distances and we're operating transit across areas that have very few stops, and we're interconnecting areas, dense areas across much less dense areas. That 30% cost recovery ratio is not an immediate objective. Certainly, we'll be looking at increasing ridership over time, but it's not a realistic financial objective for this type of service. Had we been operating the entirety of all of the urban services in all of these 8-member municipalities, that cost recovery ratio would be a lot higher. Edmonton's cost recovery ratio right now is somewhere in the order of 50%, because they've got this very large, I don't know if it's 50%, it's close to that anyways, but it's because there's this major dense area that I won't commit to reaching that 30% because it's a very different service that we're operating here.
Because the challenge I have right now is that when this was brought forward in 2020, which you were not a part of at that time, it was clear that we're going to have obviously efficiencies. Now we're 1.5 million and growing in inefficiency and costs. And the promise is that we're going to find efficiencies. Now, to find efficiencies, we'd have to at minimum break even to our current cost level. And then ideally recover all the costs that we're putting up front. But I'm hearing that that's not in the plan, for various reasons, because we have the same issues for the routing from low density, high density, long routes, etc. right now in our current route, and we're still able to achieve a 30% cost recovery.
I think I'll go back to what I said before. You've partnered with 7 other municipalities to create a regional system, and I wouldn't compare the regional system, certainly not the early days of a regional system, with a fully mature transit service that ultimately, in the fullness of time, as both densities and service increase, we'll be getting we will be achieving a higher degree of recovery from the fare box. But we have to drive up ridership, and a big interrelationship between ridership and revenue is the state of intensification. What are those areas that we are serving? How dense are they, both in terms of jobs per hectare as well as residences per hectare? And that's how we drive up ridership. This regional service, we're not going to achieve those high numbers in the early days.
Are we intending to achieve them in later days?
Absolutely. Long-term objective, that remains an objective for the service.
Long-term would be what?
Hard for me to put a date on that.
Okay,
But I would say when Edmonton is fully absorbed is when we would see that start to happen.
That is certainly an opportunity. I think that's the business case when it was put together, envisioned the full integration of the Edmonton Transit Service within 4 to 5 years. At this point in time, those discussions have not progressed. We are building the regional service that is focusing on the routes and the service that you see on the plan today.
so the amount that Edmonton decided to put in for hours obviously decreased substantially. I'm just not sure how they could do that when they signed a contract saying that they were going to be partaking in under the certain conditions, and everybody went into a contract with an understanding of how many hours and commitment we're going to have, and then they were able to withdraw a significant portion. I would say, I don't know, what is it, 70, 80, 90% of their hours were removed from this commission. So how did the board say that was okay and go along with it? Because they signed a legal document, just like we did, to participate in the same level that they agreed to in 2020, regardless of what council's in front of them at the day. So how did that manifest that they were actually able to change the terms of their contract unilaterally?
So at this point in time, what I can say is that the board has reacted to the position that Edmonton has advanced. The board has created and overseen the creation of a new service plan that meets those objectives that were identified. I think beyond that, that's something that you might want to defer to a discussion with your legal counsel. I'll simply say that we're at this point reflecting the changes that have been introduced into the discussions. The board has considered those and balanced all the needs and come up with an overall service plan.
Because I'm just wondering, like, what's to prevent any other municipality, including ourselves, to decide to cut back the hours as well and then say what we're still in?
At this point in time, I think that's a discussion that I'd have to defer to your legal counsel.
Okay, so the other question I had, and then I'm going to just let it go and I'll come back later because I don't want to take up everyone else's time at this time, is the voting. So right now, Edmonton has a veto vote with their weighted percentage, and yet the number of hours, it was based on the number of hours they were contributing, and that's why they had that weighted vote to that significant degree. Since they pulled out to such a degree, has the voting structure changed? Have they lost the veto vote?
So the voting structure is prescribed in the governance bylaw, and it does reflect the weighted cost allocation. The weighted cost allocation at this point in time remains the one that was approved for 2022 at the beginning of this year. Certainly, as we get into a different weighted cost in the future, that the rules around the voting, in particular in relation to the special resolutions, which require, it's kind of a complicated set of circumstances, but essentially it requires the vote. Special resolutions require the agreement of the municipalities that represent 2/3 of the weighted cost allocation. That's the short story. The revised weighted cost allocation will have to be reflected in the consideration of those future special resolution votes. It wasn't as simple as what you're describing in terms of the 2/3 vote or the veto. There is a prescribed formula that is prescribed in the governance bylaw.
The formula was based on the number of hours and the level of contribution from each municipality, though, in 2020. You're telling me it has not changed, though, based on the numbers of 2020, that the same weighting is applicable to all municipalities. Is that correct?
It wasn't based on the service hours. It was based on the anticipated weighted cost allocation. And there was a prescribed table that was included in the governance bylaw. And it was determined to apply to the pre-operation years, which were 20, and now we're 2021 and 2022.
Okay, I just have one more thing just keeps bothering me is I'm looking at these routes and they're basically the same as what we're doing now. Actually, I have two questions. I'm sorry, guys. I have two questions left. The one that goes down to Grant McEwen and Government Center, it has a longer route time, right? It's not the same amount of time to get there. Right? Or one of these guys is longer. Grant McEwen, right?
So I'll defer that question to James.
Thank you for the question. In some of the changes that we've made, that has basically been reviewed again and changed to match the current timelines. The additional changes that were originally made were to bring some of those vehicles down to Government Center. We've withdrawn that recommendation and it's now reflective of what the current service looks like.
So the route is basically still maintaining its current level and it won't be a change.
There may be a few extra trips built into those, but that's the only basic change.
So the time to get from point A to point B should remain consistent. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, that's good news. So the one issue I have that's left, I'll go back to that and then I'll stop honestly, is when I look at what we're getting the same routes as we had before, with the exception of one route that I'm not sure about the demand for, that was just presented in the 2020 business case, but I have no idea if it actually will have enough to justify itself. So we have basically the same routes as we have before. But we have an oversight body that's costing us between indirect costs of 754,000, commission pool costs of 269,000, and wood allocation of the debt for 315,000. So that's approximately $1.4 million more is what we're paying to be part of this, to get exactly what we had if we weren't part of this. So I'm trying to figure out what is the value in being part of this, other than the fact that we signed into a contract that we appear not to be able to get out of, even though Edmonton seems to have a choice. So what is the value in actually putting forward and continuing in this? Because I'm paying 1.4 million to get exactly what I got when I wasn't paying 1.4 million.
So I'll go back to the way I started the story. The 8 municipalities got together and made a commitment to create a partnership to develop what you had on the plan just a second ago, which is a regional network approach. While it's tempting for individual areas to look at only the direct service, the reality is that the original promise was to create a network which allows the uninterrupted or coordinated travel across all 8 member municipalities. There are new elements in that plan that all 8 members will be benefiting from. That is the plan that the board has approved, which deals with that original promise, which delivers on that original promise of an integrated network. The other imperative that was stated in the business case, or objective that was stated in the business case, is to take the existing resources and to use them for the benefit of delivery of service across all 8 member municipalities. One of the things that I didn't highlight in my presentation is that those indirect service costs that you referenced, they are actually lower than what your indirect service costs are today, because there is a sharing of those resources to the benefit of all 8 members. While it's tempting to look at just the connections between St. Albert and downtown, or St. Albert and the university, the objective was always to develop the added interconnections with the other municipalities and the other destinations across the Edmonton metropolitan area. And those are the benefits that are accruing to you as one of the 8 members. Yes, the change in circumstance around costs is substantial from the original plan. There is no question about that, and I'm not shying away from that. But the reality is that this current plan reflects the best plan given today's fiscal realities.
Just to administration, we keep hearing that it's going to cost us less for these pooled resources. But from what I understand, we have not had to, like, the staff that were handling these these resources, we're also doing it in conjunction with other things. For example, payroll was handling all of payroll. So while they may not be handling that specifically, the number of FTEs, for example, has not been decreased. It's not planning to decrease for those joint functions just because we're part of this commission, correct? In the future?
That is correct.
So the cost savings is still not realized because we still need those people doing those job functions.
Simplistically, yes, the relative weighting of those job functions, I think, stands to be sorted out as we hit opening day. But as it stands now, certainly our current estimates are based on what we know, which is the current breakdown.
Okay, thank you for your very direct and brief answers. That's it. Thank you.
Councilor Bermanski.
Thank you through the mayor to administration and the speakers here today. Highly urbanized. That's where you come from, highly urbanized. So how many people are you talking in highly urbanized? You work the Toronto area, correct?
So yes, I did work in the Greater Toronto area. I was responsible for the oversight of the York Region Transit Commission, which served a geographic area not unlike the area that is being served here by the commission, which also included the service across rural areas between urban nodes. It was a municipality that had approximately 1.3 million 1.2 million residents, but spread over a wide geographic area with some nodes. If that's what your question is.
Okay. And then you mentioned that Edmonton was a driver of the route directing to what Councillor Hughes mentioned to the Clairview station and Northgate. That was a suggestion of the Edmonton to link with the rapid transit of the future. But I don't really know anyone in St. Albert that travels that direction or needs that route. So it was directed by Edmonton, yet Edmonton's backing out on their commitment, but they're still directing that we need that route. Or has that been discussed since Edmonton gave you the direction on that?
No, I didn't indicate that Edmonton directed that route. What I indicated was that there were a number of routes that were identified in the business case as serving the entire geographical area. I also indicated that Edmonton has identified that particular road, 137th Avenue, as a future bus rapid transit. Given the need to put in a number of regional connections, we looked at that particular road along with a couple of others as contributing to the initial regional bus network. I keep saying road, the original regional bus network. That is what the board has approved, recognizing that there are needs for all residents, whether they're Edmonton residents or St. Albert residents or Stony Plain or Beaumont residents, to get to multiple locations around the region, to get to multiple jobs around the region. And so the notion that is outlined on the overall map is that notion of providing interconnectivity from multiple addresses across the 8 member municipalities to multiple addresses in other municipalities. So I wouldn't agree that Edmonton drove the identification of that route. It is one that we identified as connecting the Fort Saskatchewan route to the Edmonton downtown route to the St. Albert route, and it forms part of that overall network. There is an overall network that connects all of these routes, and that particular 137th Ave is one of those connecting network elements.
Okay, but that's a long ways in the future is, the reason for that route connection then.
No, it's a very heavily traveled corridor. And there's a lot of ridership in that corridor.
But not St. Albert residents.
Regional residents. Regional residents are using that corridor to get to multiple destinations, whether they're coming down the Fort Saskatchewan route, getting off at Clairview and going to other destinations. That's what you and the other 7 partners committed to building is a regional approach. And there are elements across the region that while they may not benefit one municipality, they benefit multiple players across the region. This is, I keep going back to this, this notion of it's tempting to look at purely one municipality's directly stated or implied needs. The board is charged with looking at the totality of the needs in the area.
Okay, and is the in the rapid transit, the ridership is quite a bit down as well, correct?
In which rapid
In the
transit?
rapid transit that you're bringing cars to rapid transit, I mean buses to rapid transit, but rapid transit usage is way down too. And there's considerations that that won't grow in the future. So that's not really a point at this point anyhow. I'll go to another question. The 1.81 million ask that you're expecting in 2024, that would be about May or March or May. You were saying there would be another ask of $1.81 million.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're referencing.
Okay. In the backgrounder here, it shows that the
What page you on, Shelley?
2024, pardon me?
What page you on?
Okay. Let's,
I think I may understand. I believe what you're asking. So it's the 1.4 is the delta, the difference between what St. Albert currently forecast we're paying and then the requisition next year annualized.
right.
The 1.8 million in 2024 reflects our estimate of the difference, but based on an entire year of service and not a 30 April start date. So that $400,000 is St. Albert's estimate of the difference that we would pay, but based on a full year requisition and not a requisition as of 30 April.
Okay, and then it said, in addition to that, there's a 34% projected budget on operation increase. So what would that be for and the amount?
So that based on some of the financials, I believe, as we looked at the operating costs that you provided for us now, estimates were higher in 2024. So I don't know what that is, but
That's the servicing of the loan. If I'm reading the backgrounder, Counselor Romansky, it's on page 6.
So it's 34% in 2024 and then another 9% in 2025 is the information we were given.
I'm sorry, I'm not, I wasn't privy to that information, so I'll.
Yeah, so through the chair to Councilor Romansky, the 34% is the delta because we're going from a 2/3 year operation in 23 to a full year operation. So that's why you're seeing a significant jump, 34%. If you took out the 30% from being a 2/3 year, you'd see a couple percent increase and then another 8% the following year. So that's the 34% is not an increase on a year to year, it's an increase on a operating for 2/3 of a year to a full year. Is the change in the delta at that point.
Okay. And then another question, you talked about, introducing this whole, I guess, maze of 13 routes or whatever for global competitiveness and, and to get workers to work. But Strathcona and, Parkland, they have a lot of, rural that do work in the plants, and a lot of the plants have their own busing services. So will you really be going to industrial type places like that in the plan?
So in the future, we will certainly be discussing that further in some of the discussions that we've had with the administration of Parkland County. We've started to talk about an on-demand type service that would connect the one route that, and I think it was called the Metro West route, but provide for service connectivity between the Metro West route and some of those job opportunities in the Atchison area. That's something that is the subject of ongoing discussion, and we would anticipate that we'll be expanding that service in the near future.
So it's not bringing the business, you'll try and service the business that's already there, is what you're saying then?
Well, so certainly, and if you talk to Malcolm Bruce from Edmonton Global. One of the things that he keeps quoting is that in their attraction work that they're going around the world and talking to major employers that are interested in employment, creating employment opportunities, creating business opportunities in areas such as the greater metropolitan area here in Edmonton. And one of the first questions that he will say that they always ask is the availability of transit to get workers to those investments that they're considering and making in some of these major business parks. So one of those, in order to satisfy that question, one of the opportunities or one of the solutions is exactly what you're seeing on the plan today. This need to get people from places of residence. Oftentimes they're in the higher density areas, but getting them to the higher paying, lower skilled jobs that are materializing as a result of these investments that multinational companies are considering. So it's not just existing jobs, it's future jobs as well. Those discussions with Parkland County, that future discussions in perhaps other areas around the metropolitan area, they will be focused on continuing to drive that economic development of the metropolitan region.
Except they did drop out of this plan in the beginning here, so. Okay, the last question for me is, you say drive up ridership, and I hear that from everyone. You know, we got to drive up ridership. We got to encourage people to take transit. A lot of people are discouraged by transit now. Like the stop points at Northgate, there's a lot of crime there. I hear from a lot of police, there's crime at a lot of the rail transit stops as well. There's less people riding for that reason. Uber's more.
Mayor, point of privilege. I'm just concerned that we're talking about crime rates without kind of the data in front of us.
I don't know, with Councilor Romansky, was your question going towards?
Okay, I'll just answer the question. How do you propose, or ask the question, how do you propose to drive ridership? Everyone says they're going to do it, but no one has a method of doing it. So I just want your answer on that, then we'll leave it at that.
The big way to drive ridership is to align the service that you're providing with where the need exists. And the first step in doing so is to create a convenient service that gets people from where they are to where they need to be. That is the primary driver. There's no question that customer service needs, cleanliness, all of the other performance objectives are vital as well. And certainly as we build the service, we will continue to have a focus on things such as cleanliness, safety, reliability of service. Those are the added components that will help increase service in the future for not just this transit service, but every transit service. But the primary driver of increasing ridership is to match demand to service provision. And that's what this current plan starts to do. It starts to provide that convenient access, that single point of connectivity, or that single access where somebody can call one particular service provider, i.e. the EMTSC, and get answers and get information and be serviced from their place where they're getting on to that place where they need to get to. That is the benefit of a regional service. Excuse me. That's what's going to drive up transit in both the medium term and the long term.
Okay, I guess we'll see. Thank you.
And I would also add that part of the original business case, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councilor Broadhead, was any of the savings, and I'm talking when we're fully uploaded and full regional system, the savings could be directed back to each municipality, or it could be directed to beefing up the service. So more routes, better buses, whatever. And that does also drive up a higher service level, would drive ridership as well. Councilor Killick.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just like to better understand the routes. I think Councillor Hughes asked a few questions, but and Councillor Romansky. So first question on the three routes coming in from St. Albert, could the changes that are, and I'll say enhancements that are proposed in kind of circling around Grant McEwen and the hospital area and downtown. Could those changes have been made, improvements been made under the current agreement between St. Albert and Edmonton? Could we get the same level of benefits through a direct agreement that we have currently?
I think that's probably best handled by us, and I'll ask Jay to comment.
Thanks to the chair, Councillor Killick. Anything is possible. There's always cost implications, right? So anytime you add time to a system, you have to do the calculation. So Will's team would take that back and look at, from a scheduling perspective, if we can meet all of our connections, right? So a lot of times when we design things, it's based on timing and without knowing the details of their plan either. It's tough to comment on how they make all the services, but with any transit system, it's achievable to do anything. It's just based on cost and timing and analysis.
Yeah. So we could achieve the improvements or enhancements without going into an ETMSC scenario. We could negotiate a deal or an agreement with or enhance the current agreement that we have with the city of Edmonton and still achieve the same results. We could pick up our residents in the new proposed locations in any case.
Yeah, and just through the chair again, we don't have a specific contract with Edmonton. It would be based on us generating those routes and then communicating what those routes are with them.
So with our routes 201 and 211 going into Edmonton are typically full in the peak hours. There'd be no benefit of us being able to stop along these routes and pick up new people because the buses would be full.
That's correct. But although I can get Will to jump in a little bit on this too, but we do, based on ridership needs, we have our people that do the analysis and we'll provide additional buses to those routes if needed. And that's within our budget. As far as extending routes to go around certain areas, Will's team does an analysis. I can provide him the floor to speak to that.
A number of those routes that you speak of are ones that operate only in the peak periods. So we taper those routes to address the peak demand. And in terms of the design of those routes, where they stop, we have always had an excellent working relationship with Edmonton. They have never impeded us in any of our route designs.
Yeah, and congratulations to the team that's been working on this for many years with Edmonton. So I just wanted to make sure that we could still do this without the need to go into a regional transit model.
I guess the only comment perhaps I would offer is if you're looking at the pure St. Albert generated routes, which I think is what you're talking about, that's true. The interconnectivity from those nodes, we could not do on our own 100%.
Right, but thank you for that point, because it leads to my next question. I can get off the bus at Grant McEwen and transfer over, pay a different fare to get to Sherwood Park or Spruce Grove. I can still do it, right? I may not be able to use the same fare card, but I can get off a bus at University and go anywhere in Edmonton. So I have that interoperability already. It's just not a kind of an integrated system. The same, to follow on question of Councillor Bermansky, the crosstown route, I understand it's regional high priority for everybody in the region to have that route there. So that's great. Would the city of Edmonton potentially just do that route in any case, is the first question. And the second one is how is the commission paying for that? Because that's a brand new route, I think. It doesn't currently exist. I can't get from Naki to Clairview, for example, today, or maybe I can. I don't know.
So I think the first part, I don't know what Edmonton would do, Counselor. I don't think any of us can actually pontificate on that. In terms of the cost breakdown for the Clareview piece, I would defer to the commission as they look at that.
Sorry, I kind of lost track of the question. I apologize. So
No.
what is the question?
Well, I know the counselors from those zones in Edmonton have been advocating very heavily for connectivity between Clareview and the north connector route. So they've been lobbying very heavily for years to have that kind of connectivity. Is it likely that Edmonton would go that route themselves? Or is this a requirement that only the commission could do it at this time? And if so, how are we paying for that new route? Like, it's brand new route?
So that route has a cost allocation that was developed and approved by the board. I just don't have it in front of me. It does have allocations to both St. Albert, actually all three, I believe, St. Albert, Fort Saskatchewan, and the city of Edmonton, but I don't have the percentages in front of me. That is as to what Edmonton might do in the future. Edmonton has identified that corridor, as I mentioned, as a future bus rapid transit corridor. I think that's in recognition of the fact that there are regional types of destinations along that. I think there are many corridors within Edmonton that sort of fall into that category. And they reflect the fact that those destinations are destinations for not just Edmonton residents, but for all regional residents.
Yeah.
They're also, and when I say destinations, it's tempting to think of where people want to get to for their morning ride, but they may also be destinations for people to get home from their places of employment in the evening. So they can be destinations both in terms of commercial or job, but also higher density nodes where people reside and move from there to other opportunities elsewhere.
Yeah, I think the allocation was like 45, 10 or something like that. So
That's correct, Counselor. We just pulled that up. So 45% St. Albert, 45% Edmonton, 10% Fort Saskatchewan.
the other one that's mentioned was the route to the airport. Is that a firm done deal with the city of Edmonton and the commission saying that that is an agreed to route? Because I've heard different stories that that's still under consideration from City of Edmonton Council.
The latter is the true. So the direct connection between that was proposed and was going to be a subject of EMTSC pursuit, if I can call it that, in the medium term from the airport directly to downtown. That is given the 100% Edmonton contribution. That's simply something that we have added in. We've moved it back into the opening day. I think it's different than the others that are being proposed. All of the others are absolute requirements for opening day, including the existing route, which is called the 747 between Century Park and the airport, which does, to Mayor Herron's earlier question, it does actually have a County of Leduc cost contribution to that one as well, along with City of Edmonton and Edmonton contributions. Those are all of the other routes, with the exception of this this airport express route to downtown, are absolute parts of the opening day scenario, but this one is a little different. This one is wholly to be funded by one entity, and it is the subject of a separate consideration at the City of Edmonton.
Great branding on the 747 route,
Yeah.
by the way.
Councillor Killick, I'm sure you have a few more questions, but it's 11, or sorry, it's noon. It's been 2 hours. I'm going to just call 10-minute break. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
that's
come back
Yep.
to you.
Yeah.
Okay. And then lunch is going to get brought in, guys. So it's just take 10 minutes to go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do, get a glass of water. So 10 after 12.
Kathy, can you hear me? And everyone? No.
Counselor Jolly, yeah, you came through.
Okay, I'm just wondering, I'd committed to going to that 1 o'clock meeting about the whatever it is. So I just kind of want to give the mayor a heads up that I'll be leaving to drive to that at 12:30 or
Okay,
thereabouts.
I heard you, Natalie.
Okay,
Hopefully, we're done this in about a half an hour. I've actually just one more member of council with questions. Do you have any questions?
no, I mean, we've been around and admin's done a great job of keeping us posted,
Okay.
so, yeah.
Okay. This is comfy. All right, welcome back, everyone. Back to Councillor Killick.
Thank you. One of the noted things was, it said there was a main new location that was identified as a stop. It didn't say exactly where that was. Is that like a major, it said major attraction, I think, and I'm confused whether that meant West Edmonton Mall route or the airport route. Just wanted to clarify that.
So thank you
I
for
didn't
that.
get the special
Yeah.
decoder ring.
That's a little bit of a hangover, a little bit of a holdover from our earlier planning. So in some of the earlier planning, we had identified a major terminal location to be at the government center terminal. And that was, I think, even in the first budget, draft budget submissions, we were concentrating on that. As the discussions have evolved, we've moved away from that. And James can speak to that in a little more detail, but that notation may be historic. We're no longer pushing right now any major concentration of service to the government center. We're instead accomplishing many of the interfaces on street on Jasper Avenue.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to read through all 600 pages and I only found the reference a few times and just wasn't sure what it was. So maybe that holdover.
Perhaps if I can just ask. James
That's
to-
fine. That's fine. That's good enough clarification.
Well, Councillor, if I might, we did make a lot of mention for major attraction locations throughout the document, the original business case. West Edmonton Mall would be one of those, as well as downtown Edmonton. And to just put a point on the Metro Cross, the Metro Cross is the existing 205 from St. Albert, part of the existing 54X from the city of Edmonton, and it interlines with the Fort Saskatchewan service. What we have is a high-level estimate from the city of Edmonton is that that route would provide riders, about 5,000 riders a week. And the 205 resources, fairly similar to the 45% overall for that particular route function.
Okay, thank you. So that it just, that's a very good clarification that it already exists in a current route and has current ridership that we could already connect to essentially if we wanted to. The other question, and this is just maybe a governance question, in terms of moving the payback of the term of for the loan or the loan guarantee from 4 years to 7 years, is that correct? St. Albert Council approved the loan guarantee with certain terms and conditions. And I don't believe it was brought back to council to actually change it from 4 to 7 year payback. So I just trying to understand the governance of how that took place.
So I'll speak to what happened at the board. So we did identify the need to mitigate, and the board discussed ways to mitigate the opening day costs to all municipalities. And while there were there were options which had a repayment consistent with the original 4-year term, identified in the borrowing documents, and these are EMTSC borrowing policy. At the end of the day, when we looked at the balancing of all of the needs, the board did decide to look at a longer payback period. Particularly reflective of the fact that we weren't going to start developing infrastructure asset reserves just yet. And it felt, I believe I'll speak for the board, it felt that this was the right decision to make to minimize the starting impacts or the first year operating budget impacts on the member municipalities. The adherence to the original 4-year self-imposed borrowing policy that the EMTSC had would have introduced an additional, I believe it was about $500,000 expenditure to 2029, and for each one of the 4 years, I think it was $500,000 or $600,000. But the governance around that 4-year or 7-year payback period, that is purely within the EMTSC board's sphere of responsibility, and that's the board actually went through the process of modifying the borrowing policy prior to approving the 2023 budget.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand that. I felt it would be like me saying I've got a 25-year mortgage, but I want to lower my mortgage payments, so I'm just going to make it 30 years, but I didn't go and check with the bank to see whether they would accept 30 years. So I'm trying to understand how the governance goes back to St. Albert, which had the original agreement to provide that line of credit.
In this case, Counselor, if I could, and I deferred to sort of a legal response, the decision was made to underwrite maximum portion of loan at St. Albert, but without any specific references to timelines. So it is 100% in the board's purview to make that decision. Marta, do you want to add anything to that?
That's correct. And in addition to that, our bylaw simply states that we will guarantee a certain portion of the commission's loan, and they may borrow up to a certain amount, and that is all. So there was no need to amend our bylaw in order to enable the commission's extension of payment time.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. The other one that during the
if I may, I'll just add, all of the funding, all of the debt financing has been advanced through a private sector institution debt instrument.
Yeah.
So while, yes, the two municipalities, Edmonton and St. Albert, have provided guarantees, the actual debt is carried by the commission, by the board, and it is indebted to the commercial institution where the debt was taken.
Yeah, I understood that. Thank you. The other piece of this that during the election campaign, we had specific questions from residents around keeping DATS or our handy bus controlled by St. Albert. And I know I issued a formal inquiry into the campaign system, and I was assured that there are no plans to migrate that. That information was still provided. But now we're saying, no, we're going to roll this into the new structure. How did that change happen? And because I personally provided that guarantee to residents based on written response from administration. So I'm feeling a little bit left out on a limb here.
So I guess I would first caveat that by saying if this council deems that you don't want to do that, you can absolutely direct us to pull that back. The costs are, for all intents and purposes, neutral. It will entail probably some additional administrative overhead to manage it internal to St. Albert, while the same folks are working to provide the service. So that was the calculus behind it in terms of that decision.
Yeah, I heard from Jada and yours that we can't split people in half. You know, they're people that do multiple functions, but somehow that kind of got lost in the translation and previous commitment that I relied on input from administration and I gave to residents. So like I said, I'm feeling a little bit left out on a limb here on that one. The other, I do appreciate the clarification of our startup costs of, 1.4 million being for 3/4 of a year of 2023, jumping up to the 1.8 for full year operation. That was one of my questions. And I also would say I share and appreciate all the questions that have been asked, because I won't repeat them. I had many of the similar questions, multiple pages here, but I think they've been all addressed. The major concern I have in a question of trying to understand how Edmonton was able to significantly, and I still don't know a definition of what significantly means, but it looks like they reduced their contribution by at least 75%, and that doesn't trigger a default of the contract. It really has me struggling to say, could St. Albert take the same approach and withdraw 75% of our commitment and still be seen as part of the commission without all of the additional costs? So that's what I'm struggling with, and I guess we'll see where it goes with this 1 year operational administrative review that the city of Edmonton has said they're going to undertake for operations, and see if there's actually any savings there. If their $11 million contribution gets past the budget. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is that it, Councillor Killick? All right, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you.
And I'm just gonna remind, we only have 40 minutes left. Lunch is on the way and I have questions too. So I'll go to you and then
Okay,
let's keep them.
I've got like
the
5 or less. So it just depends on how long the answers take. So the motion for the administrative review from Edmonton did pass. That's correct. It wasn't just because you said it was brought forward. It passed to have the administrative review at the end of 2023.
I believe it passed, yes.
Okay, and do we, I don't know if we know how long they would expect for it to complete, like I'm thinking a few months, or is it like, do we have any idea on a timeline at this point? Probably not, right?
No idea.
Okay. Out of the $7 million in guarantee in the debt, how much has been spent so far?
I don't have the exact number. I think it's about 4.5 or 5 million.
Okay. So is the, I'm not, with the plan, but is expected that the full 7 million will be spent by the April 30th of next year?
The budget identified that the first few months would continue to be debt financed, and that is why the requisitions were identified to be split the way that they were. So we were going to continue to rely on the debt instrument to fund the first 2 months of operation until we get that first requisition from the municipalities. It will be close to the $7 million mark. It'll be in that $6 to $7 million range.
So the weighted cost allocation is based on the $7 million debt load, or what debt load?
The weighted cost allocation was originally included in the governance bylaw to be reflective of the anticipated back in 2020 anticipated expenditures. Certainly as we go into 2023, the board will have to create a new weighted cost allocation. It will be based on the budget that has been approved and that we move forward with in 2023. And those cost allocations will effectively have the city of St. Albert at about 45% and Edmonton at about 35% if everything remains as approved in the budget.
So again, just what's the total number of debt that we're using for the debt servicing? Is it 7 million or is it 5 million, or what is the debt number that we're anticipating for the 315,000 in payment?
So the approved budget for the end of 2022 was a reliance on debt up to $6.4 million. So the calculation that has been included reflects that $6.4 million total end of 2022 budgeted debt amount.
Okay, and thank you. And the, why are we at 45% of indirect costs? Because when I look at the numbers, we're like the total number of 4.3, 4.4, and Edmonton's coming at 6.6. So why are we at 45% of the indirect costs? How did we come up with that number?
So the indirect service costs are basically calculated by adding up all of the service hours for both regional and local service and using the apportionment of those hours for the regional amounts and 100% local for, let's say, St. Albert local allocation of those hours. So calculating the total amount of service hours for all 8 municipalities and then splitting it up and using that as the percentage for the indirect costs for the vast majority of the indirect costs. There are some indirect costs that are directly attributable to each municipality, things like snow plowing at certain stops or snow clearance at certain stops. So it's a blend of calculations in that amount.
When council approved this in 2020, the motion was that that it was approved based on exactly what was in the Ernst & Young report entitled the Ernst & Young report that had it. And in that report, it was for regional transit only. And somehow it morphed, again, without any council approval, to go to local, and now we're including paratransit. So I'm trying to come to terms with how this moved to a much broader spectrum without council actually approving that, because what council did approve, and I'm looking to anybody at this point, not necessarily you, because you're not the one who was involved on that decision, to how did we go from regional to all of it when council did not approve regional? We approved a report that only included commuter.
Counselor, and I'll offer if there's any contextual basis off to my left, but we may have to come back to you on that as your administration.
Okay.
And the Ernst & Young report was inclusive of commuter and local. So what has changed now is the addition of paratransit.
So we actually included local at that time. Initially, it was just commuter, and then the Ernst & Young was local, and that. I see. Okay, sorry, I misinterpreted that. The last question, set of questions I have is, okay, so the 2 motions we have, one is to take it as information. There's not really much to debate on that. The second one is to bring forward a proposed negotiated service agreement between CS and Albert and the MTSC to council. So what are we looking at here? And do we have the option to even say no at this point?
In terms of, if you're talking about saying no to the delivery, that's obviously a second. If you're talking about saying no to the negotiated agreement, that's why we want to bring it forward. And that would be the architecture under which we provide our service, the transit service, under the oversight of the commission.
So, I mean, I don't really see this as an option to say no, because it looks like administration is doing a proposed negotiated service agreement. We're just getting it for information. So the two options are, do you want to know what the agreement is or not know what the agreement is, but the agreement's moving forward because there's no direction to administration to do otherwise. When I see these two motions, is that basically how I'm interpreting it? Is sort of like, we're going to do it. Do you want to know about it or not?
Well, we propose it going forward. So right now, the negotiation of the actual provision provided you provide the money is administrative function. If you wish to alter that such that you hold approval of that, then certainly council could do that. But what we're really talking about is negotiation of a service, not the service itself.
So what, do we have any negotiated service agreement to date? Or is this the only one that we would be doing it now? And the intention is to do it before the end of April.
I would offer if Jay wants to speak on that, but I think we would have enough of it done by the end of April to permit opening day service. But if we look at setting the conditions for longer term, that may be, that's why we said Q3 to come back with potential additional detail on that component of it. Jay, did you want to add anything?
No, thank you. That's exactly it. The reason for the Q3 wasn't a timeline of completing the service agreement. We're gonna have something in place prior to launch. But it was to buy some time to essentially allow us to complete the overall arching agreement outside of just the initial terms of launch.
Okay. So this is still, by the time we get it, the ink is already dried, right? Like this is really about the ink is dried. Okay. So the last question I had is, they have the alternative motions if we actually did not want to continue with this. And so thank you for that. I really did appreciate this backgrounder. This was a significantly heavy thing, but I appreciated it. So the two options there, we can withdraw, but we still have to pay for next year and the year after of whatever those numbers happen to be. And then the second one is that they initiate steps to dissolve the MTSC. So how would council initiate those steps? Would it be a notice of motion? Because it still says you require 3 members, directors to sign. And then I'm assuming there has to be a majority vote at the commission. So can you just walk through if we were to take alternative number 2? Although really alternative number 2 does not preclude number 1 and 2 from actually happening. This is just alternative if we want to move forward in a different direction overall is what I'm kind of getting. But how would alternative number 2 look?
Perhaps I'll ask Marta to walk us through that. And then if the commission wants to add anything from their perspective, they can.
Thank you to the chair, to Councillor Hughes. Technically speaking, that would look like a motion to authorize the city's representative or the director on the EMTSC board to take steps to initiate decommissioning. I mean, the word they use in their bylaws is disestablish, so we would use that word to decommission the board. So he would have to, or he would be authorized to take steps to approach other directors. He would pass a notice of motion at the board level at the EMTSC, and then take steps to see if he could get 3 other directors to sign, and then provide that notice. And then they're in the bylaw, essentially, you have to follow the timelines about when the hearing would be held. It might go into, into arbitration. But that's technically the first step here would be to make a motion to authorize our director on the board of the EMTSC to take those steps.
Does the board member need council's approval to move forward on this, or could they also arbitrarily decide to do that? Okay, does it require a council motion to begin the disestablishment?
For the disestablishment, there is not a requirement in the governance documentation of the commission to pass that motion here. There is for the withdrawal option. There's, because we're talking about the decommissioning option, that is technically doesn't require in those bylaws for council here to pass a motion of that sort. However, I would offer that it would probably be more clarity than not in terms of direction overall for administration and also for the board member if the motion was passed.
So just getting my words together here, Marta. So if there was a motion passed to do this and the board member was then assigned with that task to try to get that, would there be, there's no time put into this or time expectations of when it would just be sort of like work towards it, or?
So certainly through the chair, Counselor Hughes, you could build in, it's it's council's motion as a whole, so you could build in a timeline into that. And in terms of technical mechanics of how it would work, if you're looking for more detail, I could offer more, but I'd suggest we should go in camera. In terms of the legal advice I'd offer about that. But overall, I think I can offer that you could build a timeline into your motion if you were to pass a motion of that sort.
Okay, so I'm not going to go in camera. What we can do is have a discussion of this in a later date about this, because this is not impending today's decision about getting more information. But this needs to be a discussion going forward. That's it. Thank you.
Counselor Killick.
Thank you. Just wondering what the background, I looked at the minutes of the meeting, EMTSC meeting, and it changed in the borrowing bylaw, the red line portion of the document that says, you know, we've moved from cost recovery, and then they just changed it and left the words cost recovery out in the new wording. Was that explicitly intended in terms of how the budget? If you look at the November 11th report, I think it is, that was provided in our backgrounder. It's the only red line part of the document. Let me find it here. Councillor McKay has asked me, I think it's page 40 of the document itself, but it would be, let me see if I can find the main. It was in the. Was in the proposed budget section. I just can't find it right at the moment. But it explicitly left out the words around cost recovery. But just trying to figure out how we pay back the loan in savings. Are we giving up on trying to
Yeah. So
drive savings, or?
if I may, I think the original wording reflected the thinking in the business case. Because that certainly was the premise, that with all of the original contributions that were envisioned, that there would be cost savings over the first 4 years that would be used to pay off the debt instrument. Given that at this point in time, we were dealing with a completely new set of circumstances, which required the board's consideration and rebalancing. The notion of having an identified time frame for cost savings was not a realistic one. And therefore that wording was not included in the revised wording.
Okay. And last question, I think it's on page 73 of the main body of all of the attachments. I think that's page 603 of the 609. First attachment 1. Just to make sure I understand the numbers, it shows us $6 million worth of revenue and I'm just looking at 24 outlook, shall we say, or we can use that as a full operating year, 2024. 5.9 million in revenue, and our expenses go up to 41 million. So that goes back to the couple of questions around cost recovery. That looks like about 15% cost recovery. Is that my math roughly right there? It's page 603 in the main attachment 1, and it's page 73 3 of the main meeting package for EMTSC. So we show 2023 budget, 3.9 million, operating expenses, 29 million. Then next year, full operations, 2024, 6 million revenue, jumping up from 29 million in operating expenses to 41 million. Is that about a 15% recovery?
So I think if you're, yeah, if you're taking the simple extension of the revenues from 8 months to 12 months, that's how we calculated the $5.9 million.
Yep.
And again, looking at the extension of the direct services, direct service costs going from 8 months to 12 months increases the overall operating expenses of 41 up to $41.7 million for 2024. I haven't worked out the math as to what the percentages are, but it would be just dividing the 5.9 by the 41.7.
Yeah, I don't have my calculator out, but I'm thinking it's roughly in my head, it's 15%. So our costs go up by 10 million to save 2 million. I guess is the short version as well. So I think we've confirmed that then on. Okay, thank you.
All right, I see no more questions. The only question I had was for Marta. It's because Councillor Hughes was asking a bunch of questions that Mr. Jankowski said it would be better answered by in-house counsel. So you heard some of them. What there was, like the implications legally. I can't even remember all of them, but I just wondering if you had any, my question to you is, do you have anything to add, I guess? And then if I don't want to get into Edmonton's decisions and how we could allow that to happen, because I don't want to be putting Edmonton in a precarious situation right now. But anything you could answer publicly?
Yes, so thank you. I think I can offer a little bit of clarity in terms of the contractual kind of establishment of the commission. There is not a contract per se between the members and the commission. The commission was formed via ministerial order, and it said these are the cities that are members of the commission. And once that happened, the commission was formed, and now we're in the process of making it work. So there's not really a contract yet, because now there will be potentially a negotiated service agreement, but there are the bylaws which govern the way the commission functions. And so that's how everybody is supposed to act in accordance with those bylaws. And from what I can see, all the municipalities are so far acting in accordance with the bylaws. The assumptions and the business cases upon which the commission was established have changed due to circumstances, but the contracts itself, like, they have all been maintained and everyone's in compliance with all of the bylaws to date. So I think I can offer that clarity because there were some questions about that.
The initial business case that we saw was just a suggestion on how it could look. Was it a contract of what it would look like?
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
it was the basis upon which we thought we were going,
Right.
but it wasn't formalized in any sort of contract.
Okay. That actually answers the question about Edmonton then, pretty much. All right, is there any more questions of Councillor Mackay? You're gonna do the 3.1? Yeah, 3.1. It's the first motions, first agenda.
Well, I've just got it in front of me here that the report dated November 22nd, 2022, entitled Edmonton Metropolitan Region Transit Services Commission, EMTSC. Excuse me, opening day service plan and the 2023 budget update be received as information.
All right, anything to add?
No, I mean, I think there's been a lot of questions, and I hopefully that was useful information, both for the commission members and also from our administration, but I really appreciate the administration's, all the background work that you've put into this, and I appreciate the candor and the questions. As you can see, there's still a great deal of angst, a little bit of kind of worry. But this is right now is in front of us for information only. So I appreciate all the information that we received.
Sorry, did you read both into the record? Oh, no, 3.1 is agenda item. 3.1 has.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not going to read 3.2 yet.
No.
That's coming, the budget.
Yeah, read them both then.
Okay, I'll read them both. I apologize then.
That's
Madam
okay.
Mayor, that administration bring the proposed negotiated service agreement between the city of St. Albert and EMTSC to council for information before the end of Q3 2023. And again, all this is, and thank you very much to Marta for providing additional clarification. It's just around moving forward, and it doesn't obligate us to anything particularly. It's just around what the negotiated service agreement between the city of St. Albert and the commission would be.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. I've had concerns about this commission from the get-go. That's not been a surprise to anybody on this or previous councils. And my concerns were that administration, that the council would lose a lot of autonomy on decision-making on routes, on costs, on structure. And it's already all materialized, which I didn't think it would happen this quickly. This is the first time since 2020 that we've had an in-depth discussion about the effects of the decision on February 3rd, 2020. And I really do appreciate the amount of time and dedication that's been put into this, both in preparation and today, to have that kind of discussion, to understand the ramifications of what we agree to. I don't think that anybody anticipated this is what we would be agreeing to. I don't think anybody anticipated that Edmonton would change their decision about their involvement in it. I don't know what the cost recovery would be if Edmonton had been there. I don't know how much more we'd still be paying. Based on this model, it looks like we'd still have the 1.4 regardless, maybe slightly different on the operational non-indirect costs. Other than that, it looks pretty consistent, which means it would cost, is going to cost us more regardless of Edmonton's involvement in their level of it. But that's just all speculation because we didn't do a model based on that. But I have serious concerns, and I continue to have those serious concerns about what's going forward on this, and the fact that we really don't have an option to get out of this easily. It's going to be expensive to stay in. It's going to be expensive to get out. And there does not appear to be an end in sight. If we just fast forward 10 years, it's going to cost the city of St. Albert well over $8 to $10 million or more to continue to stay a part of this commission. And yet to get out of it could cost us the same. So we are what we are. And I really do appreciate everything that's been brought forward. Everything that we have here is really not about a vote of yes or no for this agenda item. As I said, it's just about letting us know where we're at, because we're still in this until we're out. And I honestly believe that this administration is going to work the best they can to negotiate what they can in their parameters. But we also already know the ramifications of what it's going to cost us fiscally. This was sold to us that it would save us money, at least break even. It's clear this is never going to happen. So the alternative motion number 2, I will be seriously considering as we move forward. Because if there's no end in sight, we have to start discussing whether or not this is worth it for our residents. And if we're actually getting benefit from this beyond just being part of a commission, but we're still providing the same services. The intention behind this, I believe, was noble. I think that Councillor Broadhead, when he brought this forward, he did this with the best of intentions. But the reality of a $1.5 million tax increase in perpetuity and more to come promised, because this isn't even the full amount. We're basically subsidizing what, $150,000 a month to be part of the commission to provide the same services as before, is very concerning, and it's difficult to justify to taxpayers. So I just want to thank you guys for everything you've done today. This has been a long day already for everybody. But I think that this is definitely going to give us pause for thought for council as we move forward about whether or not we should be continuing in the commission. We'll see what Edmonton does in the next month as well with their level of commitment, not only for this year, but what their commitment will be going forward. and an actual level of commitment of what they have going forward to determine whether or not it's worth continuing to pursue. But if they really don't think it's worth pursuing, then we need to read the room and recognize that we can't support a boat all on our own. And that taxpayers also can't afford this in these times to have these kind of tax increases. So I thank you for everybody who's put this forward. Your intentions of trying to get this to work were sincere. But at some point, you also have to recognize this is just going to cost more than it's worth unless something changes dramatically in a short period of time. That's it. Thank you.
Councillor Killick.
Yeah, thank you to administration and our ETMSC presenters for answering all the questions. I too share concerns of how we explain this to significant change in the operating model, and I understand things change over time, and that is certainly what has happened here. But I really don't know how we're going to explain this to our riders, routes staying as quoted substantially the same with additional interconnectivity. I don't know how we're going to explain it to our rate payers / taxpayers when we ask them to fund this, and all of our other residents that within the city. I just don't know how we're going to explain that we've gone from a cost savings model to something that is costing us tax dollars. And I really am confused and concerned that, when Edmonton takes out their local service, which is their highest cost recovery, and leaves us with a much smaller operating model, and the overheads all stay the same, it kind of leaves us in a very, very, very different operating model. And I will say it's quite plainly frustrating to me to have seen that change made. We're now left trying to make, I think, the best out of a bad situation, and I find that incredibly frustrating. So it is what it is, and we'll see how we can move forward. But I really think we have to take a very sober second look at how we move forward in or out of this totally revised model.
Thank you. Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've been silent all morning because I've lived this for the last long time. So the answers and indeed the questions were not new. They were asked at the board level as well. And quite honestly, yeah, the original business case certainly proposed a different solution that we're seeing today. But the world is different today than it was 3 years ago as well. I still believe that the original vision of a seamlessly provided regional service of public transit meets the stated goals that were initially identified, not only by transit people, but by business leaders within our community. And they suggested that this particular way of doing business would benefit the region as a whole. And indeed, this is not this region doing something that's never been done before. This is standard business practice in large and small municipalities where they try to work together to get public transit provided in a reasonably efficient way to meet the needs of all the citizens within the region. Yeah, this is different and it's hard. I lost some sleep over this myself. And but having said that, I still believe that the best path forward is to make this commission successful. And we're going to have to do the hard lifting, quite honestly, to get that done. Ultimately, it's going to take 8 partners to get this done. And to the point that was made earlier, we'll see what our largest partner chooses to do here in a month or two. And then we'll have to respond accordingly. And there's legal implications to all of this. We entered into it in good faith. The province established this in good faith. And hopefully at the end of the day, all 8 partners will come to the table and say, this is worth supporting. And we'll start to realize the benefits that were originally identified. I understand my council colleagues' hesitancy. I really do. And I don't diminish what is being asked of the city of St. Albert here today. I really don't. So, but having said that, I still believe that this is the best path forward. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Councillor McKay to close.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were gonna add in, but I respect.
We only have 12 minutes and there's still another motion, so I want to get going.
Okay, good. I'll be quick then. I mean, good comments by everybody, and I don't need to think that there's anything else more to close other than I want to emphasize partner. And I think Edmonton needs to really realize what a partner means. And if they're talking regional, I think that this is obviously going to impact other regional opportunities for us. So I really, again, want to thank everybody for their open and frank discussion, and away we go.
Call for the vote. Councillor Jolly had to log off because she's driving here for the 1 o'clock meeting, so. Yeah. Did I miss it? Okay, that passes unanimously. 3.2 on the agenda is just a postpone motion. That I will just read into the record that I'll bring forward during the budget deliberations. So that $1,452,000 be added to the 2023 municipal budget funded from taxes to support the Edmonton Metro Transit Service Commission 2023 membership requisition for St. Albert, assuming an April 30th, 2023 opening day service by the EMTSC. So that's just notice. So we won't debate it today. So thanks everyone for coming. It was a good conversation. Meeting adjourned.